In a small Kansas diner, a waitress named Jenny pours coffee in kindness, her smile hiding a lifetime of loss. But when a mysterious boy walks in, her quiet routine unravels, sparking whispers, betrayal, and a truth that'll stop you in your tracks. Stay with us to uncover what in the world is going on. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Stories like this will give you chills. Jenny Miller's was 29, but her eyes carried the weight of 40. She was a waitress at Rosie's Diner, a squat, sun-faded building wedged between a hardware store and a laundromat in rural Kansas. The kind of place where the coffee was strong, the linoleum was chipped, and the jukebox hadn't played anything new since 1982. Her life was a rhythm of sameness. Wake before dawn, pull on a faded white blouse and dark slacks, tie her blue apron, its hem frayed from years of wiping flour-dusted hands, and walk 3 blocks to work. The air smelled of dew and diesel, the only sounds the crunch of gravel under her sneakers and the distant bark of a farm dog. At Rosie's, she'd greet the morning regulars with a smile that never betrayed the ache behind it. "Good morning, Harold," she'd call to the retired postal worker at his usual stool, his newspaper spread like a battle map. "Coffee, black, coming right up." Her voice was warm, practiced, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured, a secret only the coffee pot knew. Jenny lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above the town pharmacy, where the radiator hissed like an angry cat, and the walls were thin enough to hear Mrs. Carter's late-night soaps. Her only family was in photographs, yellowed and curling at the edges. Her father, gone when she was 15, her mother 2 years later, and her aunt, who'd raised her until arthritis lured her to Arizona. Holiday calls and occasional letters were all that tethered Jenny to anyone beyond these 3 blocks. Her days were predictable, but not without their quiet beauty. The way the sunrise painted the diner's windows gold. The sizzle of bacon on Kathy's grill, its smoky scent curling through the air. The soft clink of forks against plates as farmers and truckers swapped stories about crops and roads. Yet beneath it all, Jenny carried a loneliness she'd learned to wear like a second skin. She'd been hungry once, not just for food, but for someone to see her, to stay. That hunger lingered, a shadow she couldn't outrun, but it hadn't hardened her. Instead, it made her notice things others missed. The slump in a customer's shoulders, the way a voice caught on a word. She'd slip an extra slice of toast onto a plate or linger a moment longer with a refill. Small acts that cost her nothing but meant everything to someone else. On a Tuesday in early October, crisp with the first bite of autumn, something shifted. Jenny was wiping down the counter, the rag catching on a stubborn syrup stain, when the bell above the door chimed. She glanced up, expecting another regular, but instead saw a boy, no older than 10, small for his age, with careful eyes that seemed to map every corner of the diner while giving nothing away. He wore a green jacket, too big for his narrow shoulders, and carried a backpack that looked heavy enough to tip him over. He slid into the corner booth, farthest from the door, and opened a book, its cover worn soft from handling. "Welcome in," Jenny called, her voice softer than usual, sensing his skittishness. He ordered a glass of water, his voice barely above a whisper, and thanked her with a nod so slight she might have missed it. She brought the water with a paper straw, setting it down gently, and he didn't look up. Just sipped slowly, eyes fixed on his book, as if the diner and its bustle didn't exist. Jenny watched him from behind the counter, her hands still on the coffee pot. Something about him, those careful eyes, the way he angled himself to see the door, reminded her of herself at that age, guarding a heart too bruised to trust. The next day, he came again. Same time, 7:15 sharp. 45 minutes before the elementary school 3 blocks away started. Same booth, same water, same book. By the 3rd day, Jenny noticed a pattern. He'd sit, read, sip, and watch as others ordered towering stacks of pancakes. Eggs over easy, bacon crisp enough to snap. At 7:55, he'd close his book, thank her in that same quiet voice, and leave, his backpack bouncing against his thin frame. He ate nothing, and the way his eyes lingered on the plates around him wasn't greed. It was longing, raw and unguarded, before he'd catch himself and look away. By the second week, Jenny couldn't ignore it. She'd seen hunger before, in her own reflection years ago, when her aunt would stretch a can of soup to last 3 days. On the 15th day, she acted. She carried a plate of pancakes, golden and steaming, to his booth, setting it down with a practiced frown. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, as if confused. "Kitchen made an extra order. Hate to throw it out. Mind if I leave it here?" The boy looked up, suspicion and hunger warring in his eyes. His fingers twitched toward the fork, then stopped. "It's okay," Jenny said, her voice low, reassuring. "Cook gets orders mixed up sometimes. Better to eat than waste, right?" She walked away before he could argue, busying herself with refills. But from the corner of her eye, she saw him hesitate, then pick up the fork. 10 minutes later, the plate was empty. He didn't look at her, his eyes glued to his book, but as she cleared the table, he whispered, "Thank you." It was so soft, so deliberate, it cracked something open in Jenny's chest. She nodded, swallowing hard, and carried the plate back to the kitchen. The weight of that moment heavier than any tray she'd ever carried. From then on, it became their ritual. Each morning, Jenny brought a mistaken order. Pancakes one day, scrambled eggs and toast the next, oatmeal with brown sugar when the mornings turned chilly. The boy never asked for anything, never spoke beyond that quiet "thank you," but he ate every bite, sometimes so fast it seemed he feared the food might vanish. Jenny didn't know his name, and she didn't ask. Something in his posture, the way he scanned the door, the careful way he folded his napkin, told her questions would only push him away. Instead, she made sure his water glass stayed full, the pancakes stayed warm, and the booth felt like a safe harbor, even if just for 40 minutes. She'd catch him relaxing, just a fraction, his shoulders easing from their defensive hunch, and that was enough. For now, it was enough. Their silent ritual became a quiet anchor in Jenny's days. The boy arrived at 7:15, his green jacket zipped to his chin, backpack slung over one shoulder like a shield. He'd slide into his booth, open his book, and wait for the water Jenny brought without fail, her smile as steady as the sunrise. The mistaken orders kept coming. Fluffy pancakes drizzled with syrup, eggs scrambled soft with a side of buttered toast, or oatmeal steaming with a sprinkle of brown sugar that made the air smell like winter mornings. Each day, the boy ate with a focus that broke Jenny's heart a little more, his fork moving quickly, as if he'd learned to expect empty plates. "Thank you," he'd whisper when she cleared the table, his eyes still on his book, and Jenny would nod, her throat tight, before turning back to the bustle of Rosie's diner. She noticed small things about him over time, clues that painted a picture she didn't dare complete. The way his jacket cuffs were frayed, the threads unraveling like tiny flags of neglect. The faint smudge of dirt on his backpack, as if it had been dragged through too many mornings. The books he read, dog-eared library copies of adventure stories, tales of heroes and far-off places, changed weekly, but he handled them with a reverence that made Jenny think they were his only escape. She wondered where he lived, who he went home to, why hunger seemed to follow him like a shadow, but she never asked. Kindness with strings wasn't kindness at all, she'd learned that long ago, so she let him keep his secrets, offering only warmth and food and a booth where he could breathe a little easier. By the third week, their routine had caught eyes. Rosie's was a small place, and in a town where gossip travelled faster than the morning paper, nothing stayed quiet for long. Harold, the retired postal worker who claimed the same stool every day, was the first to comment. "Who's that kid you keep feeding?" he asked one morning, his voice gruff but not unkind, his coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. Jenny shrugged, wiping the counter with a rag that smelled faintly of bleach. "Don't know, Harold. Just a kid. He's hungry." Harold raised an eyebrow, his weathered face softening, and went back to his newspaper. Others were less gentle. "Playing charity worker on company time?" a businessman in a cheap suit muttered, loud enough for Jenny to hear as she refilled his coffee. "Kids these days expect handouts everywhere." Jenny let the words slide off her, her smile fixed. but they stung like nettles. Hate to throw it out. Mind if I leave it here? The boy looked up, suspicion and hunger warring in his eyes. His fingers twitched toward the fork, then stopped. It's okay, Jenny said, her voice low, reassuring. Cook gets orders mixed up sometimes. Better to eat than waste, right? She walked away before he could argue, busying herself with refills, but from the corner of her eye she saw him hesitate, then pick up the fork. 10 minutes later, the plate was empty. He didn't look at her, his eyes glued to his book, but as she cleared the table, he whispered, "Thank you." It was so soft, so deliberate, it cracked something open in Jenny's chest. She nodded, swallowing hard, and carried the plate back to the kitchen. The weight of that moment heavier than any tray she'd ever carried. From then on, it became their ritual. Each morning, Jenny brought a mistaken order. Pancakes one day, scrambled eggs, and toast the next. Oatmeal with brown sugar when the mornings turned chilly. The boy never asked for anything, never spoke beyond that quiet, "Thank you." But he ate every bite, sometimes so fast it seemed he feared the food might vanish. Jenny didn't know his name, and she didn't ask. Something in his posture, the way he scanned the door, the careful way he folded his napkin, told her questions would only push him away. Instead, she made sure his water glass stayed full, the pancakes stayed warm, and the booth felt like a safe harbor, even if just for 40 minutes. She'd catch him relaxing, just a fraction, his shoulders easing from their defensive hunch, and that was enough. For now, it was enough. Their silent ritual became a quiet anchor in Jenny's days. The boy arrived at 7:15, his green jacket zipped to his chin, backpack slung over one shoulder like a shield. He'd slide into his booth, open his book, and wait for the water Jenny brought without fail, her smile as steady as the sunrise. The mistaken orders kept coming. Fluffy pancakes drizzled with syrup, eggs scrambled soft with a side of buttered toast, or oatmeal steaming with a sprinkle of brown sugar that made the air smell like winter mornings. Each day, the boy ate with a focus that broke Jenny's heart a little more, his fork moving quickly, as if he'd learned to expect empty plates. "Thank you," he'd whisper when she cleared the table, his eyes still on his book, and Jenny would nod, her throat tight, before turning back to the bustle of Rosie's diner. She noticed small things about him over time, clues that painted a picture she didn't dare complete. The way his jacket cuffs were frayed, the threads unraveling like tiny flags of neglect. The faint smudge of dirt on his backpack, as if it had been dragged through too many mornings. The books he read, dog-eared library copies of adventure stories, tales of heroes and far-off places, changed weekly, but he handled them with a reverence that made Jenny think they were his only escape. She wondered where he lived, who he went home to, why hunger seemed to follow him like a shadow. But she never asked. Kindness with strings wasn't kindness at all, she'd learned that long ago. So she let him keep his secrets, offering only warmth and food and a booth where he could breathe a little easier. By the third week, their routine had caught eyes. Rosie's was a small place, and in a town where gossip travelled faster than the morning paper, nothing stayed quiet for long. Harold, the retired postal worker who claimed the same stool every day, was the first to comment. "Who's that kid you keep feeding?" he asked one morning, his voice gruff but not unkind. His coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. Jenny shrugged, wiping the counter with a rag that smelled faintly of bleach. "Don't know, Harold. Just a kid. He's hungry." Harold raised an eyebrow, his weathered face softening, and went back to his newspaper. Others were less gentle. "Playing charity worker on company time?" A businessman in a cheap suit muttered, loud enough for Jenny to hear as she refilled his coffee. "Kids these days expect handouts everywhere." Jenny let the words slide off her smile fixed, but they stung like nettles. Kathy, who worked the grill with a cigarette tucked behind her ear, cornered Jenny in the back one afternoon. The kitchen smelled of grease and onions, the sizzle of burgers a constant hum. "You're feeding a stray, Jenny," Kathy said, her voice low, not cruel but practical, the kind of tone that came from seeing too many good intentions go sour. "Give handouts, they never learn gratitude. He'll disappear one day, mark my words." Jenny didn't argue. She just nodded, her hands twisting her apron, and said, "It's fine, Kathy. I was that hungry once too." It was the most she'd ever shared about herself, and Kathy blinked, surprised, before turning back to the grill without another word. The moment hung there, heavy, but Jenny didn't dwell on it. She had tables to clear, orders to take, and a boy to feed. Not everyone disapproved. Some regulars started leaving bigger tips, slipping a crumpled 5 or 10 under their plates, with a nod toward the corner booth. Good on you, Jenny. Mrs. Larson, a retired schoolteacher with a voice like warm honey, whispered one morning. Not everyone sees what you see. Those moments kept Jenny going, small sparks of light in the growing murmur of judgment. But the whispers were getting louder, and she felt them pressing against her, a weight she couldn't quite shake. She'd catch customers staring, their eyes flicking between her and the boy, some with pity, others with suspicion. Why is she wasting food on some kid? A trucker muttered to his buddy, not bothering to lower his voice. That probably just wants attention. Jenny kept her head down, her hands busy, but the words burrowed deep. The tension came to a head one chilly November morning. Mark, the diner's manager, called Jenny into the cramped office behind the kitchen. The room smelled of stale coffee and paperwork, and Mark's desk was cluttered with receipts and a half-eaten donut. He was sweating as always, his tie slightly crooked, but his expression was serious. "I've been watching you with that kid," he said, his fingers tapping the laminate desk. "Can't have employees giving away free meals, Jenny. It's bad for business, sets a precedent." Jenny's stomach dropped. She twisted her apron in her hands, the fabric worn soft from years of nervous fidgeting. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "I'll cover the cost myself." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "From your tips? Those barely cover your rent." Jenny nodded, something resolute hardening in her. "It's my choice, Mark. 1 meal a day I can manage." He studied her, his eyes narrowing, then sighed, leaning back in his creaky chair. "Fine. But if it affects your work, or that kid causes any trouble, it stops. Understood?" Jenny nodded, relief washing over her like cool water. She'd expected a reprimand, maybe even a pink slip, but this, she could live with this. From then on, she set aside a portion of her tips each day, money that might have gone toward a new winter coat or the dentist appointment she'd been putting off for months. The boys' breakfast was worth it, but the compromise didn't silence the critics. The diner's regulars grew bolder, their comments sharper. "Times must be changing," a farmer in overalls remarked one morning, his tone dripping with disdain. "In my day, no one gave free food just 'cause someone looked sad." Jenny heard it all, let it roll off her like rain on a window pane, but it was harder now. She'd learned early that defending kindness often hardened the hearts of those who criticized it. So she stayed quiet, her smile a shield. Still, the weight of their words piled up, and she felt it in the tightness of her shoulders, the way her hands shook when she poured coffee. The boy, oblivious to the growing storm, kept coming. His thank you grew a fraction louder, his eyes meeting hers for a heartbeat longer each day. Jenny clung to those moments, tiny proofs that what she was doing mattered. She'd watch him eat, his fork moving with less urgency now, his shoulders relaxing just a bit more, and she'd think, this is enough. For now, this is enough. But the diner was a small world, and small worlds had a way of turning on those who broke their rules. Jenny felt the shift, subtle but undeniable, like the first chill of a storm rolling in. The conflict sharpened one frosty morning when Kathy caught her prepping an extra plate of eggs. "You're gonna get yourself fired, Jenny," she hissed, her voice low but sharp, like a knife through butter. "Mark's already sniffing around and the regulars are talking. You think they'll keep tipping you when they see you giving food away?" Jenny didn't meet her eyes, just kept arranging the toast on the plate. "It's 1 meal, Kathy. I'm paying for it." Kathy shook her head, her cigarette bobbing behind her ear. "You're not just feeding him, you're making a statement, and people don't like statements that make them feel small." She walked away, leaving Jenny standing there, the plate warm in her hands, the words cold in her chest. That same day, a new customer, a man in a crisp suit, probably passing through on his way to Wichita, made a show of watching her deliver the boys' pancakes. "Charity's all well and good," he said loudly, his voice carrying over the clatter of dishes, "but businesses don't run on bleeding hearts." A few heads nodded, and Jenny felt the air in the diner shift, heavier now, charged with judgment. She smiled, refilled his coffee, and said nothing, but her hands trembled as she carried the pot back to the counter. The boy ate his pancakes unaware, but Jenny felt the eyes on her, the whispers circling like vultures. She was starting to wonder if Kathy was right, if this small act of kindness was a mistake, a spark that could burn her down. The pressure kept building, a slow boil she couldn't escape. Harold stopped asking about the boy, his silence louder than his questions had been. Mrs. Larson's warm words grew rarer, replaced by cautious glances. Even Mark started hovering, checking the register more often, his eyes lingering on Jenny as she worked. The diner, once a place of comfort, felt like a stage, and Jenny was the performer no one had asked for. She'd lie awake at night, the radiator hissing in her apartment, wondering why doing the right thing felt so wrong. Am I fooling myself? She'd think, staring at the ceiling. Is this kid just using me like they say? But then she'd picture his eyes, that flicker of trust when she set down the plate, and she'd push the doubts away. Not yet. She wasn't ready to let go yet. The doubts clung to Jenny like damp clothes, heavy and cold, but she kept going. Each morning, she tied her faded blue apron, walked the 3 blocks to Rosie's diner, and set a plate of something warm in front of the boy in the green jacket. His quiet, "Thank you," was her anchor, a small sound that steadied her against the growing storm of whispers and side-eyes. But the storm was closing in, and Jenny could feel its edge, sharp and unforgiving. The diner, once her safe harbour, was turning into a battleground, and her kindness, her stubborn, quiet insistence on feeding a hungry kid, was the spark that lit the fuse. The tension peaked on a grey November morning, the kind where the sky hung low and the air smelled of snow that hadn't yet fallen. Jenny was pouring coffee, the pot's weight familiar in her hands, when she overheard a table of regulars, farmers with calloused hands and faces carved by years of wind and worry. "She's going to run this place into the ground," one muttered, his voice rough as gravel, giving away food like it's a soup kitchen. Mark ought to put a stop to it. His buddy nodded, fork scraping against his plate. Kid's probably scamming her. Seen it before? Bet he's got a whole racket going. Jenny's smile didn't falter, but her grip on the pot tightened, the heat seeping through her fingers. She wanted to turn, to say, "He's just a kid, he's hungry, what's wrong with you?" But she didn't. She'd learned long ago that words like that only made things worse. Back in the kitchen, Kathy was waiting, her arms crossed, the cigarette behind her ear bobbing as she spoke. "Told you, Jenny," she said, her voice low but cutting. "You're stirring up trouble. Those guys out there? They're not just talking about you. They're talking about Mark, about the diner. You're making it look like we can't run a business." Jenny set the coffee pot down, the clunk loud in the cramped space. "I'm paying for his food, Kathy. It's not hurting anyone." Kathy's eyes narrowed. "It's not about the money. It's about you acting like you're above the rest of us, like we don't see what's what. You're making us look bad." The words hit like a slap, and Jenny flinched, her hands twisting her apron. She didn't feel above anyone. She felt alone, cornered, her kindness turning into a cage. That afternoon, Mark called her into the office again. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and his aftershave, and his desk was messier than usual, as if he'd been pacing. "Jenny," he said, not meeting her eyes, "I got complaints. Customers saying you're turning Rosie's into a charity case. They don't like it." Jenny's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm covering the cost, Mark. You said that was fine." He rubbed his temples, his brow slick with sweat. "It's not just the cost. It's the message. People come here for routine, not to feel like they're in some do-gooders social experiment. You gotta stop, or at least tone it down." Jenny's throat tightened. "Tone it down? He's a kid, Mark. He's hungry." Mark sighed, his chair creaking as he leaned back. "I'm not the bad guy here, Jenny, but I've got a business to run. One more complaint and we're done with this. Clear?" Jenny nodded, her jaw clenched, and left the office without a word. The rest of her shift was a blur, coffee poured, plates cleared, smiles forced. She felt the eyes on her, the weight of every glance, and it was suffocating. That night, alone in her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, the radiator hissing like a warning. Her hands shook as she unlaced her sneakers, the soles worn thin from years of walking these same streets. "Am I wrong?" she thought, staring at the cracked ceiling. "Is this all for nothing?" She pictured the boy's careful eyes, the way he ate like every bite was a gift, and her resolve hardened, but only just. The doubts were louder now, a chorus she couldn't silence. Then, the unthinkable happened. The next morning, a Thursday so cold the diner's windows frosted at the edges, the boy didn't show. Jenny checked the clock at 7:15, her eyes flicking to the door, expecting the chime of the bell, the shuffle of his sneakers. Nothing. She prepared his pancakes anyway, setting the plate at his empty booth, the steam curling up like a question mark. "Waste of food," Kathy muttered as she passed, shaking her head. Jenny ignored her, but her stomach twisted, a quiet unease settling in. She kept glancing at the door, refilling water glasses she'd already filled, her hands moving on autopilot. By closing time, the pancakes were cold, untouched, a silent rebuke. Jenny wrapped them in foil and took them home, unable to throw them away, the foil crinkling in her trembling hands. He didn't come the next day either, or the next. A week passed, then 10 days, and the booth stayed empty. Jenny's routine felt hollow without him, like a song missing its melody. She'd catch herself looking at the clock, hoping, but the door stayed quiet. The diner's regulars noticed too, their whispers shifting from judgment to speculation. "Told you he'd vanish," the farmer from before said one morning, his tone smug. "Kids like that, they take what they can and move on." Jenny wanted to scream, to tell them they didn't understand, but she didn't. She just poured coffee, cleared plates, and kept her eyes down, the ache in her chest growing heavier each day. The community's judgment didn't stop with the boy's absence. It grew sharper, crueler. One morning, Jenny noticed a customer snapping photos of the empty booth, his phone flashing as he smirked. The next day, she saw why. A local Facebook group had posted the pictures with a caption that made her stomach churn. "Rosie's Diner now serving imaginary charity cases." The comments were worse. "Publicity stunt, bet they're throwing the food out and claiming it's for kids. Feeding strays just creates dependency. That waitress needs a reality check. Next time a kid approaches you, watch out. You're being scammed." Jenny read them on her phone that night, alone in her apartment. The screen's glow harsh against the dark. She'd never cared much for others' opinions, but these words cut deep. Each one a betrayal of the quiet trust she'd built with the boy. The diner itself felt different now, its warmth replaced by a cold edge. Regulars who'd once nodded approvingly now avoided her eyes. Harold stopped leaving his usual extra dollar under his mug. Even Mrs. Larson, who'd called her good, started sitting at a different table. Mark's hovering grew constant, his sighs louder every time Jenny passed the empty booth. The betrayal wasn't just from the community, it was from the system she'd trusted, the diner that had been her home for 3 years. It was from fate itself, for taking the boy away without explanation, leaving her to face the fallout alone. Was I foolish? She wondered, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph on her nightstand. Her father's face smiling back. Did I just make everything worse? In her lowest moment, Jenny turned to the one thing that had always grounded her. She opened the small wooden box she kept under her bed, its hinges creaking softly. Inside was a faded photo of her father in his army medic uniform, his smile gentle against the harsh desert backdrop. Next to it was his leather journal, its pages worn from years of her reading. She flipped to a dog-eared page, her fingers brushing the familiar words. "Shared a half ration with a local boy today. Johnson said I was crazy, that he'd probably report our position to hostiles. Maybe. But the look in his eyes when he ate. Same as mine when Mom saved me the last piece of bread during the hard times. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf, but those who forget to share remain hungry their whole lives." Jenny traced her father's handwriting, tears blurring the ink. He'd known hunger too, not just for food, but for hope, and he'd chosen to give anyway. That choice, that stubborn belief in kindness, was her inheritance. The words steadied her like a hand on her shoulder. She didn't need to know the boy's story to know he was hungry, and hunger, whether for food or dignity, asked for bread, not questions. Jenny closed the journal, her resolve hardening. She'd keep going, even if the booth stayed empty, even if the town turned its back. She'd learned to live with loneliness before. She could do it again. But as she slipped the box back under her bed, a small part of her wondered if the boy was gone for good, if Kathy was right, if all her kindness had been for nothing.
The before is aan semenity. Fortfarande fights as för. Let's
23 days after the boy vanished, Jenny walked to Rosie's Diner with a heart heavy but stubborn. The Kansas air was sharp, biting at her cheeks, and the sky was a pale grey that promised snow. She'd stopped expecting the boy's return, but the habit of hope was hard to break. At 7:15, she glanced at the door, then away, her chest tight. She prepped a small plate of pancakes anyway, setting it at the empty booth like a prayer. The syrup's sweet scent mixing with the diner's usual coffee and grease. Kathy shook her head as she passed, but said nothing, her silence louder than any lecture. Jenny didn't care. She'd made her choice, and she'd live with it, even if it meant carrying this ache alone. At 9:17, everything changed. The diner's usual hum, clinking forks, low chatter, the jukebox's faint twang, stopped dead. Jenny, refilling coffee near the window, froze as four black SUVs with government plates rolled into the parking lot. They moved with precision, forming a semicircle that blocked the morning light. Customers paused, forks halfway to mouths, as pedestrians outside slowed to stare. Uniformed men stepped out, standing at attention by each vehicle, their faces unreadable. From the lead SUV emerged a man whose presence demanded silence before his uniform did. Tall, weathered, with a face carved by sun and sorrow, he wore the dress blues of a high-ranking military officer, his chest gleaming with ribbons and medals that caught the light like fire. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, flanked by two younger officers, and the sound was deafening in the hush. Mark hurried from the back, straightening his tie, his voice high and nervous. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The senior officer removed his cap, his eyes scanning the diner. "I'm looking for someone who works here." "A woman named Jenny." The room went so quiet, Jenny heard the refrigerator's hum behind the counter. All eyes turned to her, and she stepped forward, coffee pot still in hand, her heart pounding. "I'm Jenny," she said, her voice steady despite the dryness in her throat. The officer's stern face softened, just a fraction. "Jenny Millers?" She nodded, setting the pot down before her trembling hands could betray her. "I'm Colonel David Reeves, United States Army Special Forces Command." He reached into his breast pocket, pulling out a crisp envelope. "I'm here because of a promise made to one of my men. This is a letter from the Commanding General of Special Forces Operations, and I have a personal message from Adam's father." Jenny blinked, the name unfamiliar, yet heavy. "Adam?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "The boy you've been feeding," Reeves said, his tone measured but warm. "Adam Thompson. His father was Master Sergeant James Thompson, one of the finest soldiers under my command." The past tense hit Jenny like a stone. "I don't understand," she said, her hands clenching at her sides. "Is Adam okay?" The colonel nodded. "He's safe with his grandparents in Colorado. But for 3 months, he came here every morning before school, after his father deployed on a classified operation." Jenny's mind raced, piecing together the boy's solitude, his watchful eyes, the hunger that went beyond an empty stomach. "What Sergeant Thompson didn't know," Reeves continued, "was that his wife left shortly after his deployment, abandoning Adam. The boy was too proud, too scared of losing his home to tell anyone. He survived alone, stretching a small emergency fund, making meals last longer than they should have." A murmur of shock rippled through the diner, forks clattering as customers leaned forward. Jenny's heart twisted, imagining Adam, now with a name, alone in a quiet house, waiting for a father who'd never come back. "Sergeant Thompson fell in Afghanistan 2 months ago," Reeves said, his voice steady but heavy. In his final letter, he wrote that if anything happened to him, we should thank the woman named Jenny at the diner who fed his son without asking questions. Reeves opened the envelope, pulling out a handwritten note on faded paper. He wrote, "If I don't make it back, find the person giving my son breakfast." Adam mentioned her in his letters. She never asked why he was alone, never made him feel ashamed. She just fed him day after day, expecting nothing. Tell her she didn't just feed a hungry child. She preserved the dignity of a soldier's son. Jenny's hands shook as she took the letter, tears blurring the words. The colonel's voice softened. This was read at Thompson's memorial. "When Adam told us about you, the Special Forces community made it our mission to find you and thank you in person. What you did for one of our own, without knowing who he was, that means something to us." The diner was silent, even the skeptics frozen, their faces a mix of shock and shame. Reeves straightened, snapping to attention, and saluted. A rare honor for a civilian. Behind him, every soldier present mirrored the gesture, a wave of respect that filled the room. "On behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, the brothers of Master Sergeant Thompson, and most importantly, Adam, thank you." Jenny stood rooted, clutching the letter, overwhelmed by the weight of her small acts, pancakes, eggs, a smile without questions, reaching across a war to a soldier's final moments. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I just couldn't let him go hungry." Reeves nodded, his eyes kind. "Sometimes, Miss Millers, that's enough. Feeding a child without asking why, that's the greatest kindness of all." The soldiers saluted again, joined by those outside, a unified gesture that brought the diner's customers to their feet in silent awe. Jenny, the quiet waitress who'd lived invisibly for years, stood at the center, holding a father's last thank you, Her small kindness, a bridge between a boy's survival and a soldier's peace. The moment broke something open in Rosie's, and the days that followed were unlike any before. The story spread like wildfire, through town, onto social media, into the local paper. The same Facebook group that mocked Jenny now shared Thompson's letter, amassing thousands of shares and comments like, "This is what humanity looks like," and "Jenny, you're a hero." Regulars requested her section, leaving tips with notes. "Thank you for reminding us what matters." And "My daughter's in the army. Your kindness gives me hope." Mark, who'd once grumbled about the pancakes, hung an American flag by Adam's booth, adding a plaque, "Reserved for those who serve and the families who wait." The booth became a haven for veterans, soldiers passing through, and families quietly struggling, all treated with the same dignity Jenny had shown Adam. The diner's air changed, warmer now, as if kindness had seeped into its walls. A week later, a manila envelope arrived for Jenny. Inside was a letter on lined notebook paper, the handwriting careful, young. "Dear Miss Jenny," it began, "I didn't know your name until the Colonel came. You were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't invisible or broken. Dad said real heroes don't wear capes. They wear uniforms. But I think sometimes they wear aprons too. When Dad stopped writing, I thought the world forgot us. But you remembered me every day, even when I couldn't tell you why I was alone. Grandma and Grandpa are nice. They're teaching me to fish, and Grandma makes good cookies. But I miss Dad, and sometimes your pancakes. Thank you for not asking questions when I couldn't answer. Your friend, Adam Thompson. P.S. I finished my book. It had a happy ending." Jenny framed the letter, hanging it behind the counter, not for show, but as a reminder. When customers asked, she'd smile and say, "Just a thank you from a special kid." The diner became a pilgrimage site for military families, soldiers leaving unit coins and patches that formed a bulletin board of gratitude. 3 months later, a school group visited, and an 8-year-old girl studied Jenny as she refilled glasses. "My dad says you're a hero," she announced. Jenny knelt, smiling. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be hungry, not just for food." The girl's teacher nodded, her eyes soft. "Hunger comes in many forms," she said, and Jenny felt seen, understood for the first time in years. By summer, Rosie's hosted a fundraiser for military families, raising enough for an emergency fund for kids of deployed parents. Mark matched the donations, admitting to Jenny, "Never got why my dad fed every stray kid in the neighborhood. Drove Mom crazy. But I get it now. Sometimes a meal's more than food." The diner's new policy posted in the window read, "Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry." It was Mark's quiet nod to Jenny's persistence, a legacy born from her stubborn kindness.
On a it's going on as a and it's like just the special don't think first the same thing. Yes,
One side read, "Semper Memor," always remembering. She stepped outside, scanning the empty street, the flag above the diner stirring in the breeze. No one was there, just the town waking up. Sprinklers hissing, a school bus rumbling. She slipped the coin into her pocket, its weight a reminder that kindness, given freely, returns in ways you never expect. That evening, as she hung her apron, she thought of Adam in Colorado, carrying his father's memory, and she hoped the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, someone sees you. Jenny's life was still simple. 3 blocks, a frayed apron, a diner that smelled of coffee and grease. But it felt fuller now, lit by a quiet purpose. Her story might fade from your mind in days, but without retelling, it's lost forever. A waitress slid pancakes to a boy, whispering, "Same as always, honey, no charge." She never asked his name, expected nothing. But when 4 SUVs rolled up, a soldier with a letter stepped out, and a town learned what kindness can do. Write in the comments what moved you, like, and subscribe. Stories like this can't be missed.